But I did have to buy a dog. And welcome. My name is Anthony Grafton. I'm the provost here at Lyon College. This is the first in this academic year's series of faculty colloquia. I hope you all have seen the schedule, and I hope you'll consider attending future faculty colloquia, where they get to describe their scholarly activity, their research, their creativity. Students, guess what? This is at the core of what academics do. It's at the core of human nature to learn and to create that new knowledge or those new experiences. What happens, students, on September 30th, Tuesday at noon?
The research mixer?
The faculty student research mixer. That's an opportunity for you in a kind of speed dating sense to get around there and see what all some of our faculty are doing in all areas of scholarly activity and give you some ideas about how you might get involved in that work. That is a critical part of what we do here at Lyon College, is what happens outside the classroom and lab, as well as what happens inside those spaces. Working with faculty, being a part of what they are doing, creating, and learning is a powerful experience that makes a huge difference for your future. It's why Lyon College graduates are so successful, because of those out-of-class experiences like that, added to the great education that happens inside the classroom. One excellent example among many that we have here at Lyon College is Dr. Brittany Florkiewicz. She has, how many undergraduates have you involved in your research in your 3 years that you've been here?
Almost 2 dozen.
Almost 2 dozen in 3 years. And folks, this is no small thing. I know from experience, involving an undergraduate in your research, in your creative activity, takes time and commitment. But folks like her and others that are in this room and not in this room do it because we know how important it is, and because it's an extremely rewarding process to see what all our students can learn through that experience and how they grow after that experience. So please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Brittany Florkiewicz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I know it's the first couple weeks of the semester and everything is chaos, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to, see some of the research that I'm doing with my undergraduate students as part of the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab here at Lyon College. So the last time I gave a colloquium talk was back in 2023. At this time, I was mostly doing research with non-human primates like chimpanzees, Saki monkeys, and Calamico monkeys that are about this big, right? So I'm a primatologist by training. I have my BA, MA, PhD in anthropology because I wanted to learn more about non-human primates, but recently I've taken a little bit of a pivot towards domesticated animals like cats. So when the call to do a new colloquium talk came up, my students and I were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about some of the work that we're putting out here, but what should be the theme? And I said, well, of course, primates, right? Like, of course, we're going to talk about the chimps. And they're like, I don't think that's what you're doing mostly these days. I think you were in my office when we were having this like existential crisis. So we looked through the list of projects and we looked through this list of publications. So this only includes scientific peer-reviewed articles in scientific journals. We have 8 publications to date, and then we have plenty more under review, and this is including the ones that are in prep with students. So if you actually look at all of these different entries, you'll notice that some of the entries are blue and italicized. These are students. These are students that are first authoring and they're leading these projects. So I asked these students, I said, what should we talk about? And, we looked at some of the different projects that we've been putting out and we're currently working on, and we decided to do a tally, right? We looked at everything that we put out and we're trying to see patterns here. And the fascinating thing is that if you were to look and you were to divide this based on animal, so if we're doing non-human primates and cats, here's the moment, right? Everything in red is with cats. So, yeah, oh man. Well, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of my work these days isn't really involving chimpanzees, but more so domesticated cats, because everyone has cats at home, they see cats out in Batesville, and they want to learn more about them. So I guess I'm going to change my designation here from primatologist to also cat researcher as well. See, this is the perfect face, y'all. This is tartar sauce. Amazing. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to go over some of these different cat articles that have been published recently since I joined here at Lyon College in 2022. Up until this year, we've had a lot of articles come out about cats. All of the articles that are in blue, again, these are articles that students are first authoring. They took the lead on these projects. They did the data coding, they helped with the analysis and did the write-up. So these are things that are going to last for a very long time. We already have academics outside of Lyon College that are citing these studies. So we're going to start first with the 2023 study that kind of opened the box to cat research. And then we're going to talk about some additional studies that have followed since then with students that many of you actually know. And we actually have a couple of students like Levi and Neil that are here that are actually going to talk about their work, which is going to be cool. And 4 of these studies are published. 2 are in review with minor revisions and resubmissions that have already happened. So fingers crossed, we'll be talking about it next time when we do a colloquium presentation. So let's talk about the field site. So most of the work I've done thus far has been in zoos, conservation centers, or sanctuaries. We're watching large groups of non-human primates like chimps walk around and interact with one another. So you can kind of imagine the pivot that we have to make when it comes to studying cat behavior. So a lot of this took place around 2021 to 2023, where at the time, I had students that were interested in working with cats, but the question was, how do we find a large number of cats? Because if you ask people, how many cats do you have at home? They'll say, I have 1 cat, I have 2 cats, maybe 4 cats. That's awesome. But unfortunately, the national average is about 2. And I need way more cats than that. So where are we going to go to do this kind of research? Well, it turns out in the United States, there's been a booming industry that's the backdrop to a lot of the work that we're doing, which is cat cafes. So hear me out. It's a little bit weird, right? But this is actually one of the primary cat cafes that we did a lot of data collection at. This is located in Los Angeles, California. This particular cat cafe, the way that it works is that they work with local shelters and nonprofits to bring in usually anywhere from 20 to 50 cats at a given time. They're brought in, they get their vaccinations, they're socialized with, people that are giving them care and also with visitors to the cat cafe. And the idea is that when you visit the cat cafe, hopefully you're going to fall in love with one of these adorable cats and you're going to bring them home. So we found the cat cafe lounge and they had a beautiful setup. These are some of the photos from that field site. And you notice that there's cats everywhere. This is beautiful, y'all, because you can get video recording of dozens of different kinds of cat-cat interactions where it'd be nice to go into people's homes and record their cats, but 2 is not going to be sufficient. We need way more than that. So a lot of the data collection took place at the Cat Cafe Lounge, and we continue to work with them to be able to transform our results in ways that people can kind of use that when it comes to making care decisions about their own cats. Now, here comes a technical bit. So most of my work is on facial expressions, right? So the ways in which we move our face to communicate with one another. And I like to study that in non-human animals. And oftentimes there's decisions that have to be made about, well, how exactly are going to constitute that this particular thing is a facial expression, and how do we quantify it, right? We can say, oh, my cat's producing play faces left and right, but that doesn't give us good quantifiable data to work with. So a lot of my students, Levi included in the future, are getting certified in something called facial action coding systems. These were originally published in the 2000s, a little bit in the late 1990s, and they were originally developed to work with humans. So the way that these systems work is that users are trained to identify both subtle and overt movements of the face, and movements of the face are combined to create an expression. Now, in order to get this kind of training, you have to know more about the underlying anatomy and physiology of the animal's face. So for humans, you would get a lot of extensive studying hours, and you put in a lot of time and effort learning about human anatomy and physiology. Now, for these particular studies we're going to be talking about today, we make use of the cat facts. So they have been modified, so they work with a wide variety of species. There's some for chimps, there's some for gorillas, orangutans, there's also some for cats, dogs, and horses as well, and plenty more on the way. So whenever we're looking at these studies, when we're looking at the results, what we're doing here is that maybe when we're looking at a cat's facial expression and we're saying, oh, that's a play face, that cat's feeling very playful, what I see is an AU 12, 16, 25, 26, 69, 100, and 101. Each of those individual codes are actual facial muscle movements that these cats are producing. 1 second of video footage can take anywhere from 1 minute to 10 minutes to code, and sometimes hours, depending on the number of action units that you're considering. So each of these movements, which we refer to as action units in the facts coding, are what we're looking for in video footage. So we're watching all of these videos of cats interacting, and we are going through slowly, and we are rewatching over and over again to code every single facial muscle movement these cats are producing. This is a little excessive, right? Like, you're like, wow, you're gonna be a little bit weird just like sitting in the corner of a room just watching these cats play over and over. But the reason why we do this kind of thing is that it gives us a more fine-grained analysis of what these cats are communicating about. Put in human perspectives, if you say that someone is smiling, like you tell me that you went to the grocery store, you saw your friends, they gave you a smile and a wave and they walked away, you know, we understand what that facial expression is, we understand what it means. But was it a genuine smile or was it a fake smile? Was it a tiny smile? Was it a big smile? Was it the please get away from me, I'm just trying to grocery shop at Kroger at 7 p.m. smile, right? There's lots of different smiles that people produce for a variety of functions. So with the facts, you're able to pick up on that. You're able to pick up on those subtle differences in facial muscle movements that are occurring when these animals are communicating with one another. So all of my students that work on these projects, they're trained in cat facts. They're able to identify these movements, and they go through video footage with me, and they code every single combination that's occurring. This gives us a really good idea of just exactly how communicative cats are. A lot of people think cats, they don't produce facial expressions, they don't feel emotions, they're deadpan, right? But what we're actually finding with these recent studies is that they're very communicative. They're just communicating in different ways than what we're used to seeing. So a lot of this work is done under the umbrella of the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab. Cats are exactly one half of my research, and then the other half includes studies that are being done, at the Los Angeles Zoo, the St. Louis Zoo, the, Gibbon Conservation Center, Chimpunchi Wildlife Orphanage. So we have lots of different partnerships all around the world, lots of collaborative networks that we're utilizing to put this kind of research out. And this lab is comprised of undergraduate students and now graduate students, mostly undergrad students from here. So we actually have 2 members of the lab right now. We have Levi Neal. He's been working with me for, you said 2 years?
Yeah, over 2 years now.
Oh my goodness, 2 years. It feels like we just met yesterday, right? So Levi is working out with me on 2 projects. You're gonna see one of those that he's first authoring that we have under review right now pertaining to cats, but he also works with me on monkey projects too. And then we have Allison Coons right over here. She's been working with me and Dr. Jones on projects pertaining to animal enrichment at the zoo. You might have seen some of the PR related to that where Allison was one of the first students to pilot test this course. She created enrichment for the aging population of elephants at the zoo to make sure that they're having a good and happy and enriched life. And she also helped me with the monkey project too. So a lot of undergrad students, when they come to me, they're like, I love animals, y'all. but I don't have any experience. And that's completely okay, because that's what we're doing here in the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab. You don't have to be a psychology major. Levi's a bio major. Allison's a bio major. Most of these students are computer science, communications, neuroscience. They're going all kinds of places. It's just the passion for animals and learning more about how we conduct research. That's what gets you into these kinds of opportunities. So definitely go to the research mixer at the end of September. We will be there. So the researchers for this particular set of studies that I'm going to be talking about today, we have Lauren Scott from UCLA. She was an undergrad student. She's a med student now at KU. And she came up to me and said, I just want to learn more about cats. I just want to work with cats. And we said, cool, let's go ahead and do it. Levi Neal said, I want to learn more about research and psychology. I want to learn more about animals. And we said, yeah, let's do it. We have Aisha. She couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but she's a computer science major, and she was able to help us with a couple different projects pertaining to facts combinations. We also have Samantha Dickey, who's the first author on one of the recent studies that we published. She just graduated, and she has a little farm, and she has cats and dogs, and wanted to learn more about how they're communicating with one another. We also have George Martell at one of the other institutions I'm going to bring up, who was interested in learning more about how he can use his background in computer science and machine learning to learn more about how cats and other animals interact with one another. And last but certainly not least, I don't have a picture, I'm so sorry. We have Jaden Garrett from Arkansas State University, who wanted to help and learn more. Yeah, shout out to Gina's daughter, right? She wanted to learn more about cats. She's like, I just want to get involved. And I'm like 2 hours away. How can we do it? And we made it happen. So these are the researchers we're going to be showcasing today. And in addition to these undergrad students, there's a lot of other collaborators across the world that I work with. You're going to see a couple of these names pop up. So first off, we have Anna Zamansky. She is the director of tech for animals, using visual AI to better understand how animals interact with one another. We also have Teddy Lazimnik, who does a lot of machine learning modeling and also visual AI to better understand the dynamics of cat-cat interactions, which is what I'm going to show you in a little bit. And we also have Goja Zobel. She was actually, at the time, part of Companion Animals New Zealand, a nonprofit that reached out and said, hey, we want to learn more about cat-cat interactions. We're having an issue here in New Zealand where cats are decimating the local ecosystem. We need to bring them inside, but what happens when you bring like 7 cats inside together in close proximity? Can people accurately interpret those facial expressions? And also Dr. Miller, who did not provide me a picture, helping to supervise students for senior thesis and independent research studies that make these kinds of projects possible, because it is a lot of work, time, effort, and energy, lots of frustrating emails back and forth where I'm like, sorry, man, you gotta recode it, right? So it takes a village to make these kinds of projects happen. So we also have some research that they're involved with as well. All right, SCARF presentations. A lot of the studies that I'm going to be talking about, a lot of the presentations, we actually give little previews, little hints of what's to come in SCARF. SCARF is a great avenue to get feedback from other, researchers, undergraduate, graduate, and faculty alike on various projects that we're going to be putting out. All of the studies by the students that have been published or under review, they've been showcased in SCARF over the past 2 years, right? So you probably have seen some of these, and now they're a little bit different, but the same information is still there after the peer review process. So, SCARF 2026, definitely show up and say hi to some of the students and see what they're working on, because that's going to be some of the stuff that's coming out later that year. And we have plenty of projects that we're finishing up together as well. All right, I've talked enough about primates and labs and stuff. Let's get into the cats, all right? So this was the first study that we published in 2023. At the time, there was a lot of studies that were being published on cat-human interactions. That's important, right? We have cats as pets today. There's feral cat colonies, all around the world. So it makes sense that we want to understand how cats interact with us, but there wasn't a lot of scientific information being published about cat-cat interactions. How do they produce facial expressions, not just to humans, but to one another? So we went to the Cat Cafe Lounge. We recorded hundreds upon hundreds of different types of social interactions, both friendly and not so friendly. And we coded all of those facial muscle movements, and we looked at their combinations to see just how many different facial expressions can these cats produce. Is it just like 3? Are they really not that expressive? Or is it more than that? And are there certain subtleties when it comes to being able to differentiate whether or not this is a friendly expression or a not so friendly expression? So here's one of my drawings. I like to do scientific illustrations on the side. This kind of shows you what we found, all right? 276 morphologically distinct facial expressions. You know how many chimps produce? 350-ish. That's impressive, right? That's comparable to what we're seeing there. And gibbons, the other non-human primate that I work with, significantly less than that. So cats are pretty expressive compared to other primate species. Now, when we dug a little bit deeper, we were interested in which facial muscle movements are associated with friendly versus not friendly interactions, right? Friendly being, grooming together, rubbing on each other, playful interactions that don't end up in a cat fight, and then the not so friendly, fur flies, right? So what's happening there? What kinds of facial muscle movements are associated with this? So this is the neutral face for comparison. So you can look at this and then look at these. What we notice is that with the friendly facial expressions, the affiliative, there are 126 morphologically distinct signals that are just used for friendly interactions. Lots of different kinds of friendly interactions. Typically, what you tend to see during these friendly interactions is that when the two cats approach each other, oftentimes they will close their eyes, they will put their whiskers forward as if reaching out to touch the other cat, and they also move their ears forward as well. So kind of like touching behavior almost. Now, the not so friendly facial expressions we see here on the right-hand side. Now, there's 102 of these signals that are exclusive to the not so friendly condition. We notice that when these tend to happen, the ears are flattened, they're pinned back to protect them from potential danger and harm. We notice that the pupils are constricted to protect the eyes, and we notice that there's a lot of lip-licking behavior, and they're prepping to bite, they're prepping to make fur fly, essentially. Now, the cool thing here is that, okay, we have all of these different morphologically distinct facial expressions with facts, but, what do we think about, maybe facial signals that are occurring in both of these contexts? Are they kind of flexible? Can they take on different meaning depending on the cat, depending on the time of day, depending on lots of factors? And the answer is it seems like yes. There's 48 different facial expressions that are used in both of these contexts. They take on different meaning due to a variety of factors, which we're going to be looking at in more detail in the future. So this first 2023 study with Lauren Scott, who came up to me as a med student who just was interested in learning more about cats, really changed the name of the game in terms of how we're thinking about cats communicating with one another. All right, second study. So then after that study was published, we got a lot of feedback, we got a lot of requests for collaboration, and one of them was with Anna's Tech for Animals lab. So Anna reached out and said, hey, I really love what you're doing with the facts. We're actually trying to automate this process, because remember how I said that it takes hundreds of hours sometimes to code these things. With my chimpanzee data alone, it took 500 hours to code 1,000 different facial expressions. That's a lot of time I could be spent doing other things, like having a coffee at a cat cafe, right? So I'm like, yeah, let's automate it. So she told me about this landmark detection system. She said, the way that this works is as follows. So whenever we're coding facial muscle movements, we're saying, oh yeah, an AU12, a lip corner puller, it happened, right? And we're just looking at the movement of that muscle to indicate that, yes, this is present in that expression. With landmark detection systems, what we're noticing is that, she'll take video footage of cats, and what they do with every cat face is they place this series of landmarks, or these little dots, on key regions of the face that are associated with these movements that we're looking at in facts. So when we say, yes, AU12 is present using facts coding, what her algorithms are doing is saying, oh, this landmark, this landmark, this landmark, and this landmark moved. And we can potentially, she said, use that to map onto what we're seeing with facts coding. So she has to compare and contrast what they're doing with landmark detection systems to manual facts coding. Can we speed up the process? And then she said, as an extra tidbit, we might actually be able to answer some cool new research questions with my undergraduate student, George Martel. And I said, yes, let's do it. So this is the results. And to kind of break it down a little bit, so in the blue and the orange, you have manual cat facts coding that Lauren and I did. In the green and in the red, you have landmark detection systems. So this gives me a little bit of pride, right? Because it's like those hours matter, y'all. Like the coding actually helps just a little bit. But what we notice is that it actually does a pretty good job, and the more data that you're giving it, the more video footage, the better it gets. So this provides the first step in attempting to automate these processes so we can spend our time asking other kinds of questions. Now, when I asked her, I said, what other types of research questions can we ask using more automated approaches, using computational approaches specifically? She said, well, we can look at things like rapid facial mimicry. So humans and a lot of other animals, they do something called rapid facial mimicry, where they will produce the same exact expression without even thinking about it, almost within 1 second after viewing that said expression. So if you ever had a bad day after work, you go on YouTube, you pull up a funny video, people are laughing in the video and you find yourself laughing. Or maybe you're in a meeting and someone smiles and you find yourself smiling even though you're like, oh, this meeting's not going well, y'all, it's not doing well. That's rapid facial mimicry. And the hypothesized function, the evolutionary roots of this, is that it allows us to better understand what others are thinking and feeling and predict their future behaviors. We see that lots of animals do this, dogs, horses, we see that chimps do it. We see that some bears and meerkats, oddly enough, they also do this too, because it's that important. It's that integral to being able to predict future behavior, both friendly and maybe not so friendly behavior. So she said, I can use your fact coding and computational approaches to identify these instances of rapid facial mimicry. Just to put in perspective, if we're saying that in order to constitute rapid facial mimicry, you need to produce that same exact facial muscle movement within 1 second of viewing, we have to do that for every single action unit that Lauren and I coded, and we need to move the time window. We need to look at the exact moment that every single facial muscle movement was produced, and then see within that 1 second window, was it replicated? That's a lot of work, y'all. I don't want to do that, right? So she's like, all right, let's go ahead and actually apply computational approaches that are able to match these different windows to these sets of AUs and determine whether or not rapid facial mimicry is happening. Now, in the literature, rapid facial mimicry often happens the most in friendly interactions, although a recent chimp study that we just published shows that it can also occur in not so friendly interactions. But the reason why it occurs a lot in friendly interactions is play. So if you have pets at home, the boundary all between friendly rough and tumble play versus now you have to intervene because someone is ripping the fur off another animal and they're just going at it, it's really thin. It's dangerous, right? Play has a lot of really great benefits. It has cognitive benefits, it has social benefits, it has fine-tuned motor coordination benefits that animals need, including humans. So having this mechanism of rapid facial mimicry helps in these kinds of playful interactions that could turn south really fast. So we do see evidence that, like other animals, cats also experience this. When we look at it in terms of, the number of different facial muscle movements and the proportion of facial muscle movements that are replicated within that 1 second window, we notice that it happens significantly more often during the friendly condition. So we have evidence for rapid facial mimicry, and a lot of people were ignoring the cat literature because they thought cats weren't expressive. They thought cats couldn't do these things, but turns out, like other animals, they're actually pretty good at this. All right, more studies. So in about 2023-2024, after the first cat study was published, Aisha reached out to me because she saw me post a call for volunteers to help me with coding video footage. And by coding video footage, I mean looking at videos and marking which types of facial muscle movements occur. So she reached out to me, she scheduled a meeting, we sat down, and she's like, yeah, I know Python. I can do lots of cool coding techniques. And I'm like, oh, that's the wrong kind of coding. But wait, I have an idea. We have a project that we can do. So what I asked her to do was to essentially look at the facts manuals and see whether or not she could take a more computational approach to understanding the full communicative repertoire of cats. Because one of the questions I get asked a lot is, all right, in that previous study, you show there's 276 different facial expressions, but could there be more, hypothetically? And I always say, I don't know, right? Because if you look at these facts manuals, it's not just a simple matter of like, oh, we look at all the different AUs and we generate all combinations of those. There's rules. You can't do mouth opening movements at the same time that you're doing mouth closing movements. There's rules that need to be coded in there. So I asked Aisha, is it possible to create some kind of algorithm where you're able to code these different rules and regulations and then generate the full list of different types of facial expressions that the animals could produce? And she said, yeah, totally. She did it in like 2 days, y'all. That was amazing. That's why students need to help us, is because they have skill sets I can't even dream of, right? So this is what we found. So we have more illustrations for me. Bear with me. We have the cats here, and then we have the chimpanzees here. So what she found is that, out of the 24 different facial muscle movements that we tend to code for chimpanzees, there's over 200,000 possible combinations. We've seen less than 1% of these in studies. Same thing for cats, 25 different facial muscle movements, over 1 million different expressions they might be able to produce. Now, maybe we've seen everything they got. I'm going to go ahead and say probably not, because I only did one study with one population of cats at a cat cafe in Los Angeles. What about cats at a cat cafe in Arkansas? What about in New Jersey? What about feral cat populations? There's probably more. Now, the other cool thing is that this particular algorithm she created allows us to see not just the combinations, but the facial muscle movements that maybe we're missing and other studies are missing because they're so subtle. So if you look at the top two images, cats and chimpanzees, I had to sneak chimps in there, y'all. I had to do it. You'll notice these are neutral faces. And then down here, you're going to see there's different facial muscle movements that are being produced. These are what Aisha's model tagged as the movements that we're probably missing quite a bit because they're very subtle. So we see that, pupil dilation, 80-68. We also see that tongue protrusion, subtle tongue protrusion, not like very big tongue protrusion. We're probably missing both in the chimpanzees and cats. And the chimps, we're missing a lot of brow-raising movements. So she's showing us that, hey, with these different combinations that exist, we're likely missing some key muscle movements that could expand their communicative repertoire. And she's doing all of this with all the things that she learned in her computer science classes. Shout out to Marcus Birkencrow for that, right? So, that's fantastic. We're being able to push this field forward because of all of this. All right. The last time I gave a colloquium talk, I talked about my research on chimpanzee facial gesturing. So there are 4 key properties to human language, right? First off, it's communicative. I'm doing this to be able to interact with you all today. It's intentional. I'm thinking about my words, I'm planning my words, and I'm producing this towards specific individuals as I look around the room. It's flexible. Depending on what words I'm using in what context, they can take on different meaning. Like the word fishy can mean something's actually a fish, or it can mean something suspicious, and it's goal-oriented. My goal is to tell you more about the cool students here at Lyon College that are doing cat research, right? Now, the question is, do other animals use this kind of communication with one another? And the TLDR from last talk was, yeah, chimps do this all the time, not just with their hands, but with their faces as well. So then the question is, well, maybe we see evidence of this in other species like cats. So kind of adding on to that research. So I had Sam Dickey, and then we had Jaden Garrett and Lauren Scott. Sam Dickey was a psychology major who also did an animal behavior minor, or tried to do an animal behavior minor with the credits. And she has a lot of different animals at home. She wants to be a vet tech in the future, and she just wanted to learn more about cats. She wanted to get involved in research, and she was taking the senior thesis class. So all students in psychology, if you're doing the BS track, you have to do the senior thesis capstone project, where you're doing a whole thing start to finish. You're generating hypotheses, you're coding, you're analyzing data, and then you're publishing it, either in the form of a presentation at SCARF or a scientific peer-reviewed publication in a journal as well. So Sam wanted to do her project on cat facial expressions, and she said, well, what else can we potentially do with these kinds of interactions? And the answer is, well, let's see if they're doing these kinds of things that are kind of similar to what we're seeing in chimpanzees. So what she did with Jaden Garrett is they went through all of the video footage and they coded for the presence or absence of all of these different variables that we see pretty easily in human language. So what we ended up finding is that when it comes to markers of intentionality and flexibility, our results are kind of mixed. Cats have very unique social lives, so chances are they don't have the same kinds of communicative obstacles that humans do. But what we did notice is that these facial expressions, they are goal associated. They're not just producing facial expressions because, they're in a state of arousal, they're feeling anger or whatnot. They're producing these in a strategic manner in order to get what they want. Hey, back away from me. Give me that greenie that's on the floor that you abandoned the other day, right? They want all these things. So what we notice is that they're doing these behaviors, they're producing facial expressions to achieve those goals. They're very goal-driven organisms. One of the other things that we also notice is that they tend to exhibit those variables the most in certain kinds of affiliative and non-affiliative conditions. So it seems like context, like we were indicating at the very first study, matters in these kinds of interactions. Okay. Next study that we have, checking time. This study is in review right now. We had a revise and resubmit on it, and it's looking pretty promising. So I think we can put it up, and I'll put the might just in case, right? But if it does get published, then we'll have someone else. Maybe you can talk about it in the future. Yeah. So this is a study that we did with Tech for Animals. They were looking at the video footage, and they said, hey, these video clips are pretty good that Lauren collected. maybe we can do something with distance data. Spatial ecology and spatial behavior is becoming a booming field. Interest in terms of how animals position themselves in the environment and how they shape ecological factors and vice versa, but also we can apply that to cat behavior. So cats, when they're living in feral colonies, oftentimes they have a unique structure where you have one tomcat that's protecting his territory, and there's lots of females in that territory that are working together to rear offspring and acquire food for their offspring. So we notice that in terms of the way that they position themselves in the environment, it's kind of varied there. There's some unique differences. So the question that we have with this video footage is, do we see those differences in terms of how they position themselves playing out during these facial expression interactions? And with the hypothesis being that with female-female interactions, they should be more proximately close than what we see with male-male interactions. The deal here of that is that we do see that when it comes to these interactions that are, maybe friendly versus not friendly, and we also see that with the temporal data. There's some key differences there. But this information will be published pretty soon, so stay tuned to find out more. You can also see a little sample of how we're applying these different visual AI measures to the cats on the top of the screen. So you see here that we're identifying the cats with visual eye and also estimating their proximity and distance from one another based on a variety of projections. So we're going to use these cool tools and techniques to answer novel questions that would take hundreds of hours more coding in order to achieve. You ready? Yeah. All right, so I have here with me Levi Neal. He's one of my students in the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab. So like I was saying before, he's helped with the monkey project, but also this project. This was your project. This was your baby. He actually got a prestigious research fellowship from Companion Animals New Zealand. He was the only student to have ever gotten it that actually funded him to do this kind of research. So he's going to tell you a little bit more about it. We're doing student presentations, y'all. This is exciting, right? I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'm going to move over here and let you talk about it. Yep.
So I'm going to try to give a little bit of a Spark Notes version of the project that we did and try not too much to reiterate what Britt already said. But Companion Animals New Zealand was people who funded this project, and they wanted to explicitly look at whether or not New Zealanders could accurately interpret as well as predict these cat-cat social interactions. And we explicitly focus on cat-cat interactions because there's a rift that is being created in current scientific literature because it is understudied. It's understudied, but cat and human interactions is overstudied. Now, Britt already kind of talked about it, but there are 276 distinct expressions that these cats can produce, and which is one, a lot to keep up with, but also two, who can really understand what is going on in the minds of these cats? And so that's where our project came into play. We looked at whether or not people with professional experience as well as prior experience with cats, so like owning cats, could interpret and predict these interactions. And so what we did to kind of touch on this and understand what's going on is to build a survey that had demographic questions that answered whether or not they had this prior experience as well as professional experience, but also had 10 videos that was separated between affiliative videos and non-affiliative videos, which is friendly and not friendly, respectively. And so within those 10 videos, they were split into two sections. One was the initial video, which was everything leading up to the cat interactions, but also the second video was the entire thing. And so they had a chance to watch what was going on and then give their responses, whether or not they think it's affiliative or non-affiliative, as well as why they think that and what they think is going to happen in the entire spread of the video. Now, once they got done with that and clicked submit, they would be prompted to watch the entire video, which was maybe like 15, 20 seconds long, and then have a chance to revise their answers. Now, some people did revise their answers, some didn't, but that was depending on what context it was. Now, whenever we get to data analysis, the interesting thing was that people who had professional experience and owned a cat, well, not and owned a cat, but people who had professional experience, but also people who owned cats at home performed similarly on the affiliative videos. So cats that were playing around with each other. However, the interesting part with this is that for the non-affiliative videos, for the non-friendly videos, only the people who had professional experience with working with cats could understand what was going on in the non-affiliative situations, but not the people who owned cats at home. So just because you own cats at home doesn't mean that you can understand the non-afflutive context with other cats. And so if you saw a cat fighting on the street, but they weren't your cats, you might not be able to like understand when to intervene if that was happening. But I mean, that's kind of the entire premise of the project. So it was a lot of fun to do, and yeah, so I'm gonna give it back to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Quick little start.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So we're finding out interesting things about how people are interpreting these expressions. Lyon is leading that project. He's doing that work. He's showing us where there's gaps in our understanding of cat facial expressions. And we're asking people to predict these interactions based on the facial expression, like you see right over here. What's interesting is we also did some additional analyses too, right? With the open-ended responses. We asked people to explain, like, dang, right? We're like, okay, what do you think is going to happen and what did happen? And participants, they reported that usually the reason why they were confused about the not so friendly condition is that they were confused about what are indicators of playful, like high intensity play interactions, and what's a fight that's essentially, was playful but turned bad, right? So play fighting versus actual fighting is a source of confusion. So then this is great because we've just identified, all right, well, maybe there's a gap in the literature. There's a gap in terms of, the different kinds of educational materials that are out there that allow people to discern that have multiple cats at home. When is this okay? This is just a rough and tumble play fight. Everything's okay. Everything is well versus you got to intervene because somebody's going to get their whiskers whipped off, right? So we need to put those kinds of resources out there. Now we're working with Companion Animals New Zealand in the future. We have an extension of our grant that's going to allow us to create a cat dictionary, a visual cat dictionary that shows you all of these different facial muscle movements associated with high intensity play versus fighting, and you'll be able to click on these faces. They'll show you real-time muscle movements and video examples of what's going on. This will be circulated to New Zealanders through Companion Animals New Zealand, and they'll be able to use this free resource to be able to better understand their cats and make decisions when legislation comes in about how people are going to be managing their cats outside and inside. So this is something that's going to have really great applications in the future. Good job with that. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So this is a summary of the findings thus far. We have some other studies that are in the works, that are in prep, and we'll talk more about those maybe another colloquium in the future. But this is what we got right now. The first key take-home message is that cats can produce hundreds and potentially even more based on Aisha's study, facial expressions to communicate with one another. And like other animals, they exhibit evidence for rapid facial mimicry. They're not just expressionless, right? They're actually producing these subtle facial expressions to interact with one another on a daily basis. And we think that a lot of these expressions are used to regulate mood and also to predict behavior. We know that cats can produce facial expressions to achieve imperative goals. Give me that toy, back away from me, put the litter box down. And what we notice is that distance might have a pretty big role in all of this as well, the way that they position their bodies towards one another as they're interacting. And we know from Levi's study that, when it comes to us being able to look at these facial expressions and say, this is what's going to happen, that's largely dependent on context. So this gives us a whole new avenue of potential, implications and applications, even future studies on what we can do with cats, which is fantastic. And that will all be led by undergraduate students in the Animal Behavior and Cognition Lab. All of the studies that I have going on right now are all led by undergraduate students and will be published first author by undergraduate students. If you're interested, I can't really talk too much about this due to time constraints, but if you're interested in learning more about how machine learning and visual AI and all these other tools and techniques are being used today to study cat behavior, but also other, animals and species and their behavior, we recently put out an article together, Anna and I, in Science Magazine. This is in the February edition called Face Readers, as like the middle portion of the article or magazine. And we kind of talk about the different ways in which manual coding is important, but so is automation. What are the strengths and weaknesses of that, and what are some future applications, summarizing some of the work that I did, some of the work that Anna's done, some of the work that we're doing together as well. So you can look at that as well. All right, so in terms of future directions for the last 5 minutes of the presentation, we're wrapping up cat research. right? Cats are great. But you know, there's other projects, there's other cool endeavors that we're going to be doing. I have a lot of collaborators that are going to continue this research with cats. So one of them right over here is Seneca. She's doing research on how people perceive of cat illustrations, right? So if you go online and you're like, what does an angry face look like in cats? You'll probably get a dozen different drawings. Some are really great, some are not so great. And the question is, how does that impact our understanding of cat interaction? So she's going to be doing this for her PhD dissertation. We also have some submissions open where we're trying to gather more interest and more submissions about cat research specifically, but also research with other mammals that are often neglected in these kinds of studies. There's one submission that's open in Frontiers right now. If you're interested in animals and you want to submit something, we have one particular avenue where you can think about like neurobiology and physiology, but also if you're interested in behavior and coding techniques and tools like using AI and machine learning, but also just illustrations too. We're currently leading, Teddy and I, a special edition article in Frontiers Psychology, Frontiers in Veterinary Science, and Frontiers in Ethology that's asking for people to kind of address some of these gaps, hopefully, and bolster our understanding of cat behavior and the behavior of other animals. All right, to end this. So usually the number one question I get these days, I literally got it on the walk over here, was like, oh, cat presentation, that's really cool. I'm gonna learn some stuff about cats, but what about dogs? I don't study dogs. So you have a dog, right? Like, what's going on? You got cats like way later. What's going on? The answer is, we're doing it, y'all. Okay, yeah, we're doing it finally. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm finally going back home. Born and raised, I had a bunch of dogs growing up, so it's really nice to be able to say, like, yeah, we're actually going to take all these different projects, all of these cool new models, and we're applying them to dogs. So we have lots of collaborative partnerships that are opening up with the University of Missouri and their veterinary school. We have lots of partnerships still in the works with Companion Animals New Zealand to push this through. We're looking at service animals. We're looking at their behavior, how they produce facial expressions during their training. We're also looking at dog-dog play interactions. Do we see evidence of all these things we just saw for cats in dogs? The number one question, y'all, how many different facial expressions do dogs produce? Stay tuned. We'll find out in the next year or two. All right, thank you so much for coming by my talk today. I really appreciate it. Undergraduate student right here, and you're like, wow, that's cool. I want to do some animal research. Contact me. You need no prior experience. I'll work with your schedule. We'll get you on a cool project and we'll get you started. Thank you.
Be happy to take a question or two before folks go, but you don't have to stay. You can leave if you need to.
Does anyone have any questions? I'll put you on the spot. Oh, okay, we got some hands. Oh, no, pure science. Don't ask me machine learning questions. That's my collaborator.
So
Now go.
first of all, congratulations for your research and presentation. It was so interesting. So based on your research, would you say that pretty soon we will maybe have some mobile app that we can use to take a video of our pet to know what it's thinking about or what it wants?
Yeah, I would love that, honestly. That would save a lot of work. I think a lot of people are like, that's stealing your research and that's stealing like your profession. I'm like, no, please do it. I need to save hours. There's actually, this is a cool app that exists. I'm actually having my students in animal behavior do it. There's an app called iNaturalist on the market. And the way that I see some nodding, you're like, yeah, okay, you're doing the other observations around campus. Okay. And I know you really like it, Quinn. So iNaturalist, the way that it works is that you upload pictures, videos, or audio recordings of animals and plants in the neighboring area. And as you upload those pictures, it identifies the species, the genus, information about taxonomy, and information about, distribution and whether or not it's harmful or not. So that would be great to apply to domesticated animals. You take a picture, you take a video, you upload it, you get some information. And then what's cool is that you're doing citizen science. You're feeding these models data, and hopefully they're going to get better over time, where now you have some degree of accuracy that you can say, oh, this is likely to happen. Now, to be clear, though, I'm not saying that we should replace humans out of the picture because, I'm validating all these models, right? So my collaborators were like, can you check the outputs and make sure that these look consistent with the current literature and what we're seeing? There's always going to be human validation and also citizen science. People have to feed the data into it. So that's my hope, is that we get something cool that's more applied that, everyday people can use in their homes when it comes to cat-cat interactions.
You should develop it.
If I had that computer science knowledge, but I know you do. That would be cool. Did you have a question, Lucas? Okay, you're good. All right, any other questions? Yeah, Emily.
You mentioned the Cat Fact certification.
process? Could you talk a little more about that? I was very curious about it.
Yeah. So the good news is CatFax is available to everyone and anyone. So if you want to do CatFax certification, you totally can. It takes hundreds of hours of study though, and you do have to pass a certification test. At the University of Portsmouth, they have a series of researchers that do the certifications, but it's free to use. I really encourage people to look at it because, you know, places like Disney, they're using facts to be able to bolster their animations to make them look more realistic, more smooth. So there's plenty of applications other than the research that we're doing here that you can use with facts. It's really great. And then more people can help me code. Please help me code, y'all. I beg you. Awesome. Any other questions?
One more round of applause. Thank you.